Welcome to the story of my life that thrilled me and ended me at the same time.
I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would pose for an artist. But there I was, standing in my stepson's studio, my heart racing as he looked at me with intense eyes. How had I gotten here? It all started with a glimpse of a portrait. I was never supposed to see my portrait. In that moment, everything changed. I saw myself through his eyes, and suddenly the life I had settled for didn't seem so comfortable anymore. I never expected to find myself in Nico's studio that day. My heart was racing as I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. I told myself I was just being neighborly, checking on my stepson's latest project. But deep down inside, I knew it was more than that. When I reached the top floor, I paused. The door was slightly ajar. There was a faint sound of music. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Why was I so worried? For God's sake, it was Nico, the boy I had known for years, the young man who had become part of our family. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking slightly. The studio was bathed in warm, golden light from the large windows. Canvases were scattered everywhere, some finished, others just beginning to take shape. There was a strong smell of paint and turpentine in the air. And then I found what I was looking for. I saw him. You'll be surprised what happens at the end, so just wait. My eyes fell on a canvas that made my heart skip a beat. At first, I couldn't understand what I saw. It was me, but not as I saw myself. I approached, walking slower than I normally do. Each brushstroke seemed to reveal a part of me that I had forgotten existed. The woman in the painting was strong, elegant, and mesmerizing. There was a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen in my own reflection for years. My hands trembled as I touched the edge of the canvas, afraid it would disappear. The texture of the paint was rough under my fingertips, connecting me to reality. This was real. This is how Nico saw me. Questions were running through my mind. How long had Nico been studying me? Why had he chosen this photo? I recognized it now. It was taken years ago, before I met Marco, before we had settled into the comfortable, predictable life we had built together. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The picture showed an old woman I had almost forgotten existed. A woman with dreams, with passion, with an untamed spirit. When had I lost this part of myself? When did I start to see myself only as Marco's wife, Nico's stepmother? At that moment, I realized that I had been hiding from myself for years. I had put aside my dreams of modeling, of being seen, of being liked. I told myself that I was satisfied with my life, that I no longer needed the excitement of my youth. But standing there, face to face with this other version of myself, I felt an intense longing that took my breath away. I wanted to be that woman again. I wanted to feel alive, to feel beautiful, to feel desired. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in the painting and in my own thoughts. But suddenly I heard footsteps on the stairs, and panic overtook me. I couldn't let Nico find me here, looking at this intimate portrait of myself. I walked away from the canvas with my heart pounding. I felt my legs weaken as I left the room. When Nico reached the top of the stairs, I went out, muttering some excuse about looking for a lost book. But when I retreated to my own safe space, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. That picture had awakened something in me, something I thought I had buried long ago. And now that it was awake, I didn't know if I could put it back to sleep or if I wanted to. The rising voices drew me once again towards Nico's studio. I paused in front of the door, my heart racing as I fought between curiosity and the need to respect Nico's privacy. But the girl's angry words cut through the air, sharp and clear. "You don't understand what you want. I can't be what you want me to be." I heard hurried footsteps, and before I could back away, the door opened. A young woman, her cheeks stained with tears, rushed past me without so much as a glance. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I found myself knocking softly on Nico's door, my anxiety overriding my common sense. When there was no answer, I gently pushed it open. Nico was standing by the window, his shoulders slumped and looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. "Nico," I said softly, "are you okay?" He turned to face me, his eyes meeting mine. In that moment, I saw something I had never realized before, a deep feeling, a raw need that made my breath catch in my throat. "Judith," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I'm sorry you had to hear that. I was pulled into the studio by an invisible force." "What happened?" Nico ran his hand through his hair, his disappointment evident in every movement. "This is important, really important for my career, but I can't seem to get it right." As he spoke, I felt a strange mixture of sympathy and something else I couldn't put a name to. It was like a stirring in my chest, a warmth spreading through me. "The client wants a portrait of an elegant, strong, beautiful woman," Nico continued, "but every model I work with is not right. I don't capture what I'm looking for." His gaze intensified as he looked at me, really looked at me. I felt vulnerable, as if he could see parts of me that I had long forgotten. "Judith," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I want you to pose for me. You represent everything I'm trying to capture." For a moment I felt my cheeks flush. My heart was beating so fast I was sure he could hear it. "Me," I whispered, disbelief coloring my voice. "But I never." Nico took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "You are elegant, strong, beautiful, everything I need for this piece." I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. Part of me wanted to run away, to hide from the raw emotion in Nico's eyes. But another part of me, a part I thought I had buried long ago, came alive. "I don't know, Nico," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not a model. I wouldn't know what to do." He reached out, his hand inches from my face. "You don't have to do anything. Just be yourself. Let me capture the real you, the you I see every day." I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his closeness. My mind was full of conflicting thoughts. This was Nico, my stepson. I was married to his father, but this artist didn't see me as a stepmother. He saw me as a woman, a muse. When I opened my eyes again, Nico was still waiting there. His eyes were pleading with me, filled with a mixture of desperation and admiration that made me weak in the knees. "Please, Judith," he said softly, "I need you." At that moment I felt something change inside me. The woman I used to be, the woman who dreamed of being admired and desired, came to life. I found myself shaking my head without even realizing what I was doing. "Okay," I whispered, "I'll do it." I paused at the top of the stairs, my hand on the cold doorknob. The studio beyond now held more than canvas and paint. It was like a doorway to something unknown, exciting and terrifying at the same time. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for whatever lay ahead. As soon as I stepped inside, a world of soft shadows and flickering lights enveloped me. Nico had changed the place. Gone was the harsh glow of the work lamps, replaced by the soft glow of candles scattered around the room. The air was filled with the smell of wine and something else, anticipation, perhaps. Soft jazz music from hidden speakers filled the space with a sultry rhythm that matched the beat of my heart. My eyes fell on a black silk dress draped over a nearby chair. Nico must have chosen it especially for tonight. I ran my fingers over the smooth fabric, marveling at how something so delicate could feel so heavy. With trembling hands I pulled it over me, the cool silk sliding over my skin like a whisper of what was to come. Nico's eyes widened as I emerged from behind the veil of secrecy. "You look perfect," he breathed, his gaze traveling over me in a way that made my cheeks flush. He gestured to a plush lounge chair carefully placed in the center of the room. "Shall we begin?" As I settled into my pose, Nico poured us each a glass of wine. As I took a sip, the rich ruby liquid shimmered in the candlelight, and I felt it warm me from the inside out. With each brushstroke, I felt more exposed, more alive. Nico's eyes darted back and forth between me and the canvas, the intensity both unnerving and exhilarating. The wine had loosened something inside me, made me hyper, aware of every little detail. The way Nico's eyebrows furrow with concentration, the soft scratching of the hairs on the canvas, the way the candlelight danced across the planes of his face, emphasizing cheekbones I had never appreciated before. Ostensibly, we were taking a break to rest, but every pause only increased the tension between us. Nico moved closer to adjust my posture, his fingers leaving trails of fire wherever they touched my skin. I found myself leaning into his touch, craving more than that electric connection. As the night wore on, I watched myself take shape on the canvas. It was me, and yet it wasn't me. The woman who emerged from Nico's brushstrokes was confident, sensual, and essentially herself. She was everything I had buried deep inside me, everything I had been afraid to embrace, and now, seeing her come alive, I desperately wanted to know her. Finally, after what seemed like hours, or maybe only minutes, Nico put down his brush with a satisfied sigh. "It's done," he said softly, his eyes never leaving mine. The portrait was breathtaking. Nico had captured not just my likeness, but something deeper, a spark, a fire that I had forgotten existed inside me. Looking at this version of myself, I felt a profound shift, as if the ground beneath my feet had suddenly tilted. I turned to Nico, my breath catching in my throat as our eyes met. The air between us seemed to crackle with unspoken words and electric possibilities. In that moment, I knew we were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could change everything. The canvas before us held more than paint and passion. It was a mirror reflecting a version of myself I barely recognized. What would happen if I embraced it? My body was buzzing with a mixture of wine, adrenaline, and something much more powerful. The air between us crackled with unspoken words and electric possibilities. Nico's hand touched my arm, and a shiver ran through me. "Judith, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and urgent. I knew I had to stop him, to remind him of Marco, of our family, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself approaching him, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. His confessions poured out, words of longing and admiration that made my head spin. "I have always seen you, Judith, not just as my father's wife, but as a woman strong, beautiful, fascinating. You're the muse I've been looking for all along." As I listened to him, my heart raced, alternating between the excitement of his words and the gravity of the situation we were in. I thought about Marco, about the life we had built together. But in that moment, standing in front of Nico, I felt more alive than I had in years. It was as if I was rediscovering a part of myself I had long forgotten. Our lips were slowly coming closer together. My undried red lipstick and wet lips met his, and for just a few seconds I tasted the taste and pleasure. My body responded with a hunger I didn't know I had. My hands fumbled with my clothes, my skin met his, and the outside world ceased to exist. The only thing that mattered was this moment, this connection that transcended our assigned roles. When we met, I wasn't Marco's wife or Nico's stepmother. I was just Judith, reborn in the fire of our passion. Every touch, every kiss was like a discovery. I had never experienced anything so intense, so all-consuming, as if Nico's artistic eyes had seen straight into my soul, awakening parts of me that I thought had been lost forever. In the back of my mind, I knew what we were doing was wrong, but guilt and excitement were mixed together. With every caress, with every whispered affection, I felt a little further away from the woman I had been hours before. Our bodies were moving together in a dance as old as time, but for me, it was something completely new. I marveled at the way Nico's hands followed my curves, as if he had memorized every inch of me. His eyes never left mine, filled with a mixture of desire and something deeper, a recognition that went beyond the physical. When we reached the heights of passion together, I felt as if I had been shattered into 1,000 pieces to be recreated. In that moment of blissful oblivion, I understood what it really meant to be seen, to be desired not only for my body, but for the essence of who I am. Later, as we lay entangled in each other, reality began to seep back into me. But I couldn't bring myself to regret what had happened. I knew I couldn't go back to the woman I had been. This night had changed me irrevocably, had awakened long, buried desires and dreams. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the studio windows and woke me from my slumber. I lay still for a moment, my heart pounding as the events of the previous night washed over me like a tidal wave. I could feel Nico's warmth next to me, his steady breathing a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I slowly turned my head to watch him, his face peaceful in sleep, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. My chest tightened with a confusing mix of emotions. Guilt and euphoria were fighting inside me, making me dizzy and breathless. Something terrible was about to happen. The portrait stood in the corner of the studio, a silent witness to our work. I didn't dare to look at it directly. I was afraid of what would be reflected in those painted eyes. Would they judge me? With trembling hands I slid off the bed, picking up my clothes scattered on the floor. Every movement felt like a betrayal, both to Marco and to the woman I had been hours before. I pulled on my dress, the silk cool against my flushed skin. Every step I took towards the door increased my pulse. I paused at the threshold, torn between running away and crawling back into Nico's arms. I was torn between two options, and I didn't know what to do. The sound of movement from downstairs made me decide for myself. Panic tightened my chest as I realized Marco must be awake. With one last look at Nico's sleeping form, I quietly closed the studio door behind me. As I walked down the stairs, my mind was overflowing with conflicting thoughts and feelings. I knew that after tonight, my life would never be the same. The woman I had been before comfortable, content, and predictable felt like a distant memory. In her place stood someone new, someone who lived with passion and possibility, but also carried the weight of a secret that could destroy everything. I went into the bathroom and locked the door behind me. When I finally worked up the courage to look in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and fear. I looked alive in a way I hadn't in years, but there was an uncanny quality to my gaze that I couldn't shake. As I splashed cold water on my face and tried to compose myself, I couldn't help but think about the duality of my emotions. The thrill of last night's passion still coursed through my veins, making me feel more alive than I had in years. But there was also an overwhelming wave of guilt that threatened to drown me. I thought about Marco, sleeping peacefully in our bed, unaware of how drastically our lives had changed. How could I face him? How could I look him in the eye and pretend everything was the same when I felt so fundamentally changed? And then there was Nico, my stepson. Just the thought made me shudder with a mixture of shame and desire. As I dried my face, I realized that I was standing at a crossroads. The road ahead was blurry and uncertain, full of potential consequences that could shatter the life I had built. Yet a part of me, a part I was only just beginning to understand, was eager to explore this new territory, no matter the consequences. I took a deep breath and steeled myself to face the day ahead. I knew that every interaction, every look, every word spoken would be colored by the secret I was now carrying. The weight of the secret was weighing on me, making it difficult to breathe. In the days that followed, with a fervor bordering on obsession, I devoted myself to being the perfect wife, cooking meticulously, keeping the house spotless, and showering Marco with love. It was as if I believed that I could erase that night by sheer force of will, that I could somehow make up for my betrayal by being everything Marco could ever want. But my efforts were hollow, as if I was playing the role of the woman I used to be. Every time I walked through the door of the studio, My heart raced, and I was transported back to that night. The smell of paint and turpentine in the hallway was both intoxicating and eerie. Marco didn't notice anything, absorbed in his work and our comfortable routine. His indifference both comforted and stabbed me in the gut. How could he not see the change in me? How could he not sense the turmoil simmering beneath my carefully constructed exterior? The portrait haunted me. I knew it was there, in the studio, capturing a truth I couldn't face. Sometimes, late at night, when sleep overtook me, I would find myself in front of the studio door, my hand on the doorknob, trembling with the desire to see it again. But I never went in, afraid of what I might do if I did. As the days passed, I realized that the real deception was not what I was doing with Nico, but what I had been doing for years. I had buried my dreams, my desires, my true self under comfortable routine and societal expectations. The woman in the portrait, vibrant, passionate, alive, was the real me, and I had kept her locked away for too long. As I stood in front of the mirror, studying the contours of my face, I realized that the woman in Nico's portrait was not just a fantasy. It was me, the real me, waiting to be rediscovered. That night in the studio had awakened something in me that I couldn't ignore. My heart raced as I thought about how Nico looked at me, how he saw beyond the roles I had played for so long. My journey did not end there. In many ways it was just beginning. I felt a mix of excitement and fear, knowing that every choice I made from now on would shape the woman I was becoming. The question was no longer just about Nico or Marco, but about the life I really wanted to live. I closed my eyes, remembering how alive I felt under Nico's gaze. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like for more.